Hi, everyone. It's Kali Arevalo, editor of Institutional Investing in Infrastructure, here with Edward Tsai, the managing director and head of real assets and infrastructure at Wafra. Today, we're going to talk about some trends and challenges in the aviation sector. But first and foremost, thank you, Edward, for joining me. Would you like to add anything about your role at the firm before we start?
Sure. And Callie, thanks for having me on. Very much looking forward to the conversation. And I would just say, we've been as investors who are focused on the real assets space, we've been quite active in aviation over the past decade plus. And so that's focused primarily on aircraft and aviation equipment leasing. That's been across all parts of the life cycle. And then away from asset leasing, we're also active in transportation linked sectors like fixed space operations as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for that bit of background. And that's leads me into my question, just coming from that base. What is investor appetite for the aviation sector? Where does it stand today as we're nearing the end of 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think we probably need to zoom out a little bit and to understand the environment today or the way we think about the environment, we probably need to, roll the tape back a little bit to the pandemic, where I think some of the forces that are shaping the market today, really got accelerated or disrupted in some ways. And so, firstly, the pandemic itself, highly disruptive to the aviation industry, I think maybe second only to hospitality in terms of the level of disruption. And so that's resulted in probably 3 or 4 thousand fewer aircraft in the air than would have been the case if we didn't have the pandemic. It led to a wave of airline and operator bankruptcies. It led to early retirements of aircraft. It accelerated the conversion of passenger aircraft into cargo. And so, that's kind of, the first order impact. And on top of that, you had OEM issues. And so what I mean by that is, it's not just kind of the regulatory issues around the Boeing 737 MAX that everyone, remembers, but supply chain issues. I mean, these are very complex global supply chains, and those were also disrupted. So, that led to lower production numbers over the course of the pandemic. It led to delays in certain flagship product launches. So replacement cycles have also extended. And it's not just Boeing, right? It's Airbus. They encountered those supply chain issues, production issues as well. And it's also the engine OEMs. And so as we've transitioned into this next replacement cycle for next gen narrow body equipment, for instance, you've seen Pratt and Whitney have issues with the GTF engine. That's led to many aircraft still on the ground today as a result of that. It's caused some airline bankruptcies. So you put all that together, and Boeing and Airbus are still at monthly production levels that are below where they were pre-pandemic. And then I think the highlight, and this is one that I think people probably didn't see coming as much, as if we go back a few years, is that you also had a lot of technical talent and know-how leave the labor force. So as this disruption worked its way through the system, you had the labor pool for MROs, for maintenance shops, all the ancillary parts of industries supporting commercial aviation globally. That experienced, just a massive reduction in terms of personnel and know-how. And so as the industry recovered, and folks were seeing greater demand for flying aircraft longer, you also had an inability for the MRO industry to kind of absorb, the heightened need for maintenance for older equipment. And so that's led to increasing costs along with everything else at rates, far higher than headline inflation, and turnaround times for shop visits have dramatically increased as well. So those were the challenges on the supply side. On the demand side, global passenger traffic has recovered fully. So in the last 2 years, we're above 2019 levels. Historically, if you go back 50 years, putting aside black swan events like the pandemic, passenger volumes have generally increased above GDP at 4 or 5% a year. So demand is very strong and the supply situation is constrained. And so bringing it back to your question, I think all of that has created an environment today where asset values have increased significantly over the last few years. New deliveries are still not where they were projected to be. New order books are years out. And operators, as I mentioned, are flying equipment for far longer than planned. And then you have a very constrained maintenance environment. So I think people are seeing that. I think investor appetite is healthy, and interest is definitely I would say has increased kind of year over year.
Yeah, interesting. So passenger volumes are increasing, demand is strong. What are some trends that you see that are driving more of that momentum in the space?
Because of that supply demand imbalance, the way we think about it is it's a very good environment for asset owners. But it creates, at least the way we think about it, it creates a heightened need for discipline from buyers. And what I mean by that is really from the buyer community, there are folks who have trafficked in the space as we have for a long time. I think have seen different parts of the cycle, um, and are kind of taking that discipline into consideration. As that buyer universe expands, I think these are very technically complex assets. These are probably among the most sophisticated pieces of equipment that the species has ever produced. And so when you think about underwriting assets with presumably 20, 25-year useful lives, having that technical know-how, having the experience to think about it through different parts of the cycle, underwriting, not just the market, but the asset itself, we think that becomes more valuable and more important as kind of the buyer interest has increased.
So I know Wafra has a focus on the middle market. What opportunities does the middle market present for firms like yours that are active in this space?
So again, going back to the supply de demand imbalance, I think we've seen more consolidation in the industry. It's been a number of portfolios and businesses that have come to market. We think that's going to continue. You've seen already one of the large aircraft lessors being taken private by another large one. I think a number of MRO businesses. This is a great environment for that industry. Those have come to market or are coming to market. As we think across those opportunities, for us, it's really, we think the demand fundamentals will be in place for years to come, absent another kind of black swan event. You know, going back to, thinking about how complex the issues are facing OEMs, we don't think there's a single solution or even a handful of solutions that's going to start to unwind that in the near term. And so our view is it's going to take a number of years to start to come back into greater balance. And so we think that the environment is attractive. But again, I think so long as you kind of have that informed, disciplined view towards not taking on too much residual risk or what you're really underwriting. And then the last piece I would just highlight is you mentioned us being in the middle market. Um, Size matters, and so aircraft engine leasing, we think it's been perennially a really attractive subsector. When you're a large cap or you're a mega cap sponsor, it's hard to deploy massive amounts of equity capital into the space. And because that's less relevant for us, I think that's a space where we also potentially can face less competition because you're not competing with the super scale sponsors who need to deploy a few $100 million of equity to move the needle on their latest fund.
So we started with talking about the pandemic. We kind of circled into some of the opportunities you're seeing. I just wanted to sort of round it out. Are there any major challenges that others should be aware of in the space moving into 2026?
Topmost in our minds is really it's a competitive market. It's a sellers market at the moment. And so, in any situation where you see that the really strong demand fundamentals, I think it attracts a broader buyer universe. And there are folks out there who have been in the space for a long time, but I think there are also folks who maybe it's a subcomponent of their of a broader diversified strategy, aren't regularly trafficking in the space, and so I think that can lead to situations where there's overbuying or value inflation. And so we just want to be selective in terms of, where are verticals that we think there's relative value. And also, the industry, aviation is highly cyclical. And so if you look back through the cycles, I think it's a sector where when things get frothy, a lot of passive investors, or maybe where the structures haven't been fully aligned, folks have gotten burned. So I think that's a phenomenon that we think a lot about, and we think the long-term demand fundamentals again are there, but it's not, it's what's the right way to get to have exposure to the industry at this moment in time. And then I think looking longer term, I think there are other considerations. Sustainability is one that the entire industry is addressing, and I think moving towards. There still isn't that silver bullet for the industry, and commercial air travel, cargo still forms a relatively small percentage of global CO2 emissions, but it's one that has some technical challenges to address. And I think as other modes of transportation maybe move towards higher efficiency, the share from aviation will come more into focus, or could garner more attention. I think the good news there is there are some interesting and potentially very relevant solutions on the horizon. So you've probably seen sustainable aviation fuels. I think the existing aircraft engine technology with relatively modest modifications can use that type of fuel. And so it's just moving the cost curve for solutions like that, investing into those assets. And I think the industry as a whole has had good attention on it, and that's one that probably needs to be solved over the medium term.